The blizzard came down from the north not as weather, but as a living enemy, a white fury that meant to kill everything it touched. Wind shrieked through the Montana Territory with a violence that bent century-old cottonwoods until their spines cracked that drove ice crystals through wool and leather, like 1,000 tiny blades that turned the world into a howling void, where direction became meaningless and survival a matter of heartbeats. The temperature had plunged to perhaps 15 degrees below zero, cold enough to freeze exposed flesh, black in minutes, cold enough to make each breath a searing pain in the lungs, cold enough to kill. On the ragged outskirts of Silver Dollar, a town that squatted at the edge of civilization like something diseased, a barn leaned hard into the wind. Its timbers groaned and shrieked, nails pulling slowly from wood, and the entire structure threatening to collapse under the accumulated weight of ice and fury. Inside the hayloft, Julia Kovacs had ceased to be fully human. 23 years old, born in a Galician village so small, it appeared on no map she had been reduced to something more primitive, a creature of pure survival instinct, huddled beneath a horse blanket, so stiff with ancient sweat and grease it could stand on its own. The blanket stank of animals and labor and desperation. But it was all that stood between her and death. Her feet had stopped hurting an hour ago. That should have terrified her. She had heard the stories on the immigrant ship whispered in a dozen languages during the endless Atlantic crossing about how cold killed you in stages. First, the violent shivering that made your muscles burn. Then the numbness creeping up from extremities. Then the warmth, the false comfort, the overwhelming desire to sleep. And then nothing. Just silence and ice, and a body that would not be found until spring thaw. But Julia was beyond terror now. Terror required energy she no longer possessed. What remained was a dull, distant awareness that she was dying, coupled with a stubborn refusal to let it happen without resistance. She had not eaten in 2 days. The last meal had been a crust of bread stolen from Pike's kitchen during the chaos of loading the wagon, dry, hard bread that had scraped her throat going down, but had been food nonetheless. Before that 3 weeks of near starvation, Pike's men feeding her and the other women just enough to keep them upright, never enough to give them strength to resist. The memories of the ship came unbidden, as they often did when her mind began to wander from cold and hunger. 6 weeks crossing the Atlantic in steerage packed into a space meant for cargo, not humans. The stench of unwashed bodies and seasickness, and the chemical toilets that overflowed in rough seas. The woman in the bunk above Julia, who had died in the night, simply stopped breathing between one moment and the next, and whose body had been wrapped in canvas and thrown overboard without ceremony. The children crying endlessly, their wails echoing through the metal hull. The men who looked at young women with eyes that promised violence. Julia had survived that crossing by becoming invisible, by making herself small and quiet and unworthy of notice. She had survived by believing in the letters in the promise of Thomas Gray and his modest farm, and his need for a wife who could work hard and build something honest from Montana soil. The letters had been beautiful. Written in careful English on good paper, they had described a white house with a garden chicken scratching in the yard, a life of dignity and modest comfort. Thomas Gray had written that his first wife had died in childbirth 3 years prior, that he missed having a partner, that he believed a marriage based on mutual respect and shared labor could become something more. Given time. Julia had believed every word because she had needed to believe. Because her mother was dead, and her father was dead, and the landlord's men were circling like wolves demanding payments her family could never make. Because the village priest had looked at her with pity and said there was nothing for her there, that America was her only chance. She had sold everything. Her mother's wedding ring, a thin band of tarnished silver, had brought enough for the cheapest passage. Her father's pocket watch had paid for the train ticket from New York to the Montana Territory. She had arrived in Silver Dollar with a cloth bag containing one spare dress, a hairbrush, and a small leather-bound book of prayers her mother had given her on her deathbed. The man waiting at the station had not been Thomas Gray. Montgomery Pike was perhaps 50 years old, dressed in fine clothes that spoke of wealth with cold eyes that assessed Julia the way a rancher might assess livestock at auction. He had smiled when he saw her, a smile that never reached his eyes, and said in accented English, "Miss Kovac, I am a business associate of Thomas Gray. He asked me to collect you. There's been a small delay paperwork, you understand. You'll stay at my boarding house for a few days until everything is sorted." Julia's English had been poor, learned from a phrase book during the Atlantic crossing, and she had not understood all his words. But she had understood the iron grip on her elbow as he guided her to his wagon. She had understood the other women already sitting in the wagon bed, 3 of them all young, all with the same hollow-eyed expression, a people who had seen their futures and found them unbearable. The boarding house had barred windows. Inside, women moved like ghosts through dim hallways, their eyes downcast, their voices barely whispers. Julia had been shown to a small room with 6 beds and told to wait. That night, lying on a thin mattress that stank of mildew, she had heard a woman sobbing through the wall. Another woman's voice, speaking in broken German, had told her the truth Julia's heart had already known. There was no Thomas Gray. There was only Pike. And Pike owned them now, owned their labor, owned their bodies, owned their futures. The letters had been written by men Pike paid to forge dreams on paper. The debts were real: passage, lodging, food, all tallied in Pike's leather-bound ledger. $200, $300, numbers that might as well have been $1 million. "You work it off," the German woman had whispered. "In the house, with the men who pay Pike. You work until you're used up or dead. There's no leaving." The next morning, Pike had come to Julia's room with 2 of his men. He had explained in that same pleasant voice that she owed him $215 for her passage, her lodging, her meals, that she would begin work that evening, that resistance would be unpleasant for everyone. Julia had run. She had waited until the men left, had slipped out a ground-floor window during the chaos of breakfast, and had simply run. No plan, no destination. Just blind flight into the growing storm, wearing only her torn dress and mismatched boots, one of which she lost in a snowdrift within the first mile. Pike's men had come after her with dogs and lanterns, but the blizzard was already howling, already erasing her tracks faster than they could follow. Julia had stumbled through the white darkness until she saw the barn had climbed into the loft, more by instinct than conscious thought, and had burrowed into the hay, like a wounded animal seeking a den. That had been hours ago, or days. Time had lost meaning. Below her, through cracks in the floorboards, she watched lantern lights swing wildly, heard voices, male, rough, cruel. "Pike wants her back," one man growled. "Alive, if possible, but if she's froze to death, he wants the body. Proof she didn't make it somewhere to talk." A pitchfork stabbed upward through the hay, missing her leg by inches. Julia bit down on her frost-blackened fingers, tasting blood, her body locked rigid. "Check the loft." A boot touched the ladder's bottom rung. The barn doors exploded open. Not swung, exploded, driven by wind so powerful, one door tore completely off its top hinge. The violence of it was shocking, primal. Ice and wind blasted into the barn like something alive and malevolent. A man stood in the doorway. He was Lakota, that much was immediately clear, even in silhouette. Tall, perhaps 6 feet, with the lean, economical build of someone who had never known an excess of food, who had been carved by hardship into something stronger than softness could ever produce. His war bonnet, wrapped in oiled cloth, but still visible, spoke of status, of honor earned. The beaded breastplate across his chest gleamed, even in the dim light, intricate geometric patterns that represented weeks of painstaking work. He held a lantern in one raised hand. In the other, a rifle hung with deceptive casualness, held loosely but ready to become lethal in an instant. His voice when he spoke was quiet. It did not need to be loud. It carried the weight of absolute certainty. This barn belongs to Henry Miller. I work for Miller. The storm is 40 miles per hour and dropping to 20 below. Your horses are already dying. You have 5 minutes before your hands are too numb to hold reins. If you stay longer, you'll freeze before you reach town. He was not threatening them, threatening. He was stating meteorological fact with the authority of a man who had survived 100 such storms. Pike's men looked at each other. The calculus was simple Pike's money versus losing fingers, toes, noses to frostbite versus dying in a drift 2 miles from anywhere. They chose to live. When the last hoofbeat faded into the storm's shriek, when the barn doors had been wrestled closed and braced, the man set his lantern on a post. He removed his rifle with careful deliberation and leaned it against the wall within reach, but no longer held. He unwrapped the oiled cloth from his war bonnet, shook ice from the eagle feathers, and hung it on a peg. Only then did he look up at the loft. Julia stared down at him, her face bone-white, her eyes enormous, her body trembling so violently the ladder shook. The man did something unexpected. He took 3 deliberate steps backward, putting distance between himself and the ladder. He lowered himself to sit on an overturned crate near the cold stove, making himself smaller, less threatening. He placed his hands flat on his knees where she could see them. "You are safe here." He said his English, careful and precise, each word given equal weight. "I will not touch you. I will not harm you. But you will die of cold if you stay in that loft. I've seen it happen. First you stop shivering, then you feel warm, then you sleep, then you don't wake. You're in the second stage already, I think. The choice is yours. I will not force it." Julia's mind dulled by hypothermia, and 3 weeks of accumulated trauma struggled to process this. The words were English, but the cadence was different, foreign, careful. "My name is Maddo." He continued, still not moving. "It means bear in my language. You may call me that, or Matthew if you prefer. I work for the man who owns this barn. You are welcome to the fire and food if you come down. If you choose to die in the loft, I will respect that choice. But I would prefer you chose to live." He stood slowly, every movement telegraphed, and began building a fire in the stove. His movements were economical, practiced. Dry grass twisted into a nest. Small twigs arranged with geometric precision. Larger sticks crossed above. A match struck against iron, the brief flare bright in the darkness, then cupped and breathed upon until flame caught and began to crackle. Heat reached the loft. Real heat, not the false warmth of hypothermia's second stage. Julia felt it on her face, like a physical touch. She made her choice. Climbing down was harder than climbing up had been. Her legs barely held her weight. Her hands were clumsy, frost-nipped fingers refusing to grip properly. She nearly fell twice. When her bare foot touched the frozen barn floor, pain shot up her leg, the pain of circulation returning, of nerve endings, remembering they existed. Maddo had moved back to the crate, giving her space. He reached into a saddlebag and withdrew thick wool socks, placing them on a hay bale within her reach, before returning to his seat. "For your feet?" he said simply. Julia stared at the socks, at his face, at the rifle leaning against the wall, still within his reach but not held, at his hands open and empty on his knees. She took the socks. They were enormous, meant for a man's feet, but they were dry and warm. She pulled them on with shaking hands, sank onto the hay bale, and held her palms toward the stove. Neither spoke for several minutes. The only sounds were fire-crackling wind howling and the labored breathing of a dying horse in its stall. Maddo rose and went to the animal. He knelt, placed his ear against its ribs, listened. Then he spoke to it quietly in Lakota words Julia could not understand, but whose tone was unmistakable. The tone of farewell, of granting permission to stop fighting. He drew a knife. The blade was perhaps 7 inches long, worn, but maintained honed to cruel sharpness. He found the artery in the horse's neck with practiced fingers and made a single deep cut. The horse shuddered once, then went still. Blood pooled dark and steaming in the frozen straw. Maddo cleaned his knife on straw, returned it to its sheath, and came back to the fire. He offered no explanation or apology. The horse had been dying. Now it was not. That was all. From another saddlebag, he withdrew jerky elk or venison dark and tough and tore it in half. He offered one portion to Julia. She took it. Her stomach overrode her mind. She was starving. She bit into the meat and chewed mechanically, jaw aching, stomach cramping, as it tried to remember its function. They sat in silence. Outside, the blizzard continued its assault. Inside, a small pocket of warmth and something almost like safety began to form. Finally, Maddo spoke. "You are running from Montgomery Pike." Not a question, a statement. Julia's hands froze on the jerky. She looked at him, trying to read his face, trying to determine if this was the moment she died. "I know Pike." Maddo continued, his voice level. "I know what he does. I know the kind of man he is. You ran from him. You had reason. I will not make you speak of it if you do not wish. But if you want help, I need to know what I am helping you escape." Julia's throat worked. When she spoke, her voice was raw, barely above a whisper, her accent thick and stumbling. He lied to me. Letters say farmer, husband, Thomas Gray. But man at station, different man, named Pike. He put me in wagon with other women. Women with dead eyes. Take us to house with bars on windows. Woman there, she speak German little bit. She tell me, Pike own us now. Say we owe money. Say we work for him, for men who pay him. Say this is life now until we die, or... She couldn't find the English word, just gestured helplessly. Go crazy. She met Maddo's eyes directly. I not go back. I die first, right here, right now, before I go back. Maddo regarded her steadily. Something shifted in his expression, not quite approval, but acknowledgement. Recognition of a fellow survivor. You will not go back, he said. The words carried the weight of an oath. Pike will try. The law will help him. Sheriff Hollis is Pike's creature. But you will not go back. This I promise. Julia wanted to believe him, but she had believed promises before written in careful letters on good paper. As if reading her thoughts, Maddo said quietly, I do not make promises lightly. When I say a thing, it is so, or I die making it so. 4 years ago, my sister Winona climbed into a wagon. A white trader said he had sewing work in silver dollar. Good work, honest pay. She was 16, gifted with beads. She believed him. His voice remained level, but Julia heard the fault line beneath it. She never came home. I searched 2 years. Every ranch, every camp, every settlement. People whispered Pike's name, then looked away. After 2 years, I stopped searching for her and started watching for a chance to destroy him. You are that chance. The barn door opened, and both tensed. A lean man entered, shaking ice from his hat. Easy, Maddo. It's Henry Miller. My barn, remember? This was the owner. 46 years old, with a face carved by hard choices and eyes that carried ghosts. He took in the scene, Julia in men's socks, the dead horse, the fire, and understanding dawned slowly. "The girl from the wagon," he said quietly. His voice carried complicated weight. "Pike won't let this go." "Then we go where Pike cannot follow," Maddow said. "To Marshal Garrett in Wolf's Crossing." Henry pulled out a flask, drank deeply. "That's 2 days through country Pike's men know better than God. But there's another option. Jean Laurent, French-Canadian, used to work railroad detectives. He's been documenting Pike's operation for years. Lives in Echo Canyon, now drunk most days, but still keeping records. If anyone has proof Pike can't explain away, it's Laurent." "How far?" "Day and a half if we push." Henry looked at Julia, and something cracked in his weathered mask. "I'll help. I rode for Pike 6 years back. Transported his women. Took his money. Told myself it was just business. But I knew what he was doing. Knew and took the money anyway. Can't undo that. But maybe helping you counts for something." They prepared through the night. Julia changed into men's clothes, canvas trousers, flannel shirt, a coat that had belonged to Henry's late wife. The transformation was psychological as much as physical. In women's clothes, she had been prey. In these rough garments, she felt like she might survive. Before dawn, as gray light began to filter through cracks in the barn walls, Maddow looked at her directly. "From this moment, you are not prey," he said. "You are a woman traveling with armed men who will kill anyone who tries to take you. Do you understand?" Julia nodded, something fierce kindling in her chest. "Good," Maddow said. "Then we ride." Part 2. The Journey Through Ice and Wolves. The world beyond Henry Miller's barn had been rewritten in a language of ice and cruelty. The blizzard had passed, but it left behind temperatures so brutal that spit froze before hitting the ground, that turned iron brittle that could kill in minutes. The sky was the color of old iron, pale and lifeless, offering light but no warmth. They moved slowly. Henry's wagon broke trail. Maddow ranged ahead on his dun gelding, testing depth and finding safe passage. Julia buried under hay and blankets in the wagon bed. Every breath burned. Every exposed inch of skin stung and then went numb. By mid-morning, Maddow pointed out the wolves. 6, he said quietly. "Timber wolves, staying just beyond rifle range. They'll follow us." Julia strained, but saw nothing. Henry's jaw tightened. "Winter's been hard," Henry said. "Game's scarce. 3 horses and us. We're the best meal the pack's seen in weeks." "Can we outrun them?" Julia asked, her English stronger now that Pike's immediate threat had receded slightly. "No," Maddow said. "Wolves are patient. They'll wait for a mistake. Our best defense is to stay alert, stay together, appear strong. Wolves attack when certain of success. We give them doubt." Throughout the morning, Julia caught glimpses, gray shapes flowing between skeletal trees, yellow eyes watching from ridge lines, the pack always there, always watching, always waiting. Around noon, they stopped briefly at a frozen creek. While Maddow broke ice with his rifle butt so the horses could drink, Henry came to Julia with hardtack and dried apple. "Eat slow," he said. "Your stomach's not used to much. Too fast you'll be sick." Julia ate mechanically, her body demanding fuel. "The wolves, will they attack?" Henry glanced toward the tree line where shapes moved in shadows. "Eventually. Question is when. Today we might reach the schoolhouse by dark. Tomorrow," he shrugged. "Tomorrow we cross open country. That'll be harder." Maddow returned, his face grim. "We need to move. The pack's getting bolder. They sense our horses are tired." They rode on. The landscape shifted from flat prairie to rolling hills, then to broken country ravines and coulees where ancient water had carved the earth. The wind had scoured some areas nearly clean, leaving exposed rock and frozen soil. In others, drifts had accumulated so deep the wagon had to detour miles. In one such detour, navigating a narrow cut between rocky hills, the ambush came. The first shot was shockingly loud in the cold silence. The bullet struck the wagon frame 2 inches from Julia's head. She dropped flat on instinct. Matto wheeled his horse, bringing his rifle up in one fluid motion. 3 men on the high ground rifles aimed down. Pike's men. Henry snapped the reins. The wagon horses bolted the wagon, bouncing violently over frozen ground. Julia clung to the sides, certain she'd be thrown or shot at any instant. Matto charged forward, not away, but toward the ambushers' closing distance. His rifle cracked twice. 1 man fell tumbling down the slope in a spray of snow and blood. The other 2 decided survival trumped Pike's money. They mounted and rode hard to the west. When Matto caught up to the wagon, a quarter-mile later, there was blood on his coat. Julia cried out in alarm. "Not mine," he said. "Horse was grazed, shallow. She'll hold." Henry's hands shook on the reins. They were waiting. Pike sent men ahead. "He will have men on every approach," Matto said. "We must be smarter." They pushed on more cautiously. The wolves grew bolder as afternoon deepened, no longer content to shadow from a distance. They began testing, moving closer, yipping and whining in their own language. Around mid-afternoon, as they crossed exposed ground, the lead wolf appeared perhaps 70 yards away. It was massive, maybe 130 pounds, with a scarred muzzle and 1 torn ear. It sat on its haunches and studied them with the calculating patience of a predator that knew it would eat eventually. Matto fired over their heads. The pack scattered but reformed quickly, circling, looking for weakness. "We need shelter before dark," Henry said. "In the open at night they'll come." "How far to the schoolhouse?" 2 hours, maybe 3. The sun was already sinking, staining the snow pink and gold. They pushed harder. The horses struggled through drifts, steam rising from their flanks. The wagon axle groaned ominously. As twilight deepened to dusk, the wolves grew closer still. Julia could hear them now, not howling, but making small sounds, communicating. She counted 8 distinct animals, 8 distinct. Matto dropped back alongside the wagon. "When we reach the schoolhouse, move fast. Run for the door. The wolves will test us before we reach safety." The schoolhouse appeared as a solid shape against the darkening sky lamplight, glowing in its windows. 400 yards of open ground. "Now," Matto said. Henry whipped the horses into a final desperate run. Behind them, the wolves broke into pursuit, no longer patient. Julia heard them clearly pause, pounding frozen earth, panting breath, excited yips. Matto fired twice over his shoulder, discouraging but not killing. 1 wolf yelped and fell back. The others came on. The schoolhouse door burst open. A woman appeared with a shotgun, fired both barrels into the air. The massive reports echoed across the prairie. The wolves scattered, frustrated. Henry stopped the wagon directly at the door. Julia jumped down legs, nearly giving out. Matto propelled her forward with a hand on her shoulder. Henry came last, stumbling through the door as the lead wolf reached the bottom step. Inside, warmth and lamplight. Julia collapsed on a bench, gasping. Through the window, wolf eyes reflected the lamplight, like floating coins. The woman with the shotgun, Celia Harper, broke the weapon, ejected spent shells, reloaded. She was perhaps 38, iron gray hair, pulled back hands that had never been soft. "Well," she said dryly, "I see you brought trouble, Henry Miller." "Always do," Henry managed. Celia studied Julia with sharp eyes. "You're the one Pike's hunting." Julia nodded. "Good. About time someone ran from that bastard." She turned to the stove and began ladling soup. You'll stay tonight. Wolves won't enter and Pike won't attack a schoolhouse publicly. Tomorrow we plan. As they ate thick venison stew, the first hot meal Julia had tasted in weeks, Celia laid out the situation with brutal clarity. Pike owns this town. Sheriff most business owners judge Carver through blackmail. Your only chance is going over his head. Marshal Garrett in Wolf's Crossing or Laurent's evidence if he's still alive and sober. Laurent, Henry said. Echo Canyon. He's got 7 years of documentation. Celia nodded. Then you need papers that'll stand, even if none of you survive to testify. She went to her desk, produced paper and pen. Henry, write down everything you know, everything you did for Pike. Sign it. I'll witness. Henry's face paled. That's a confession. Yes. If Pike gets it, you're dead. But you're likely dead anyway. At least this way your death means something. Henry wrote for an hour, hand shaking, sweat beading despite the chill. 4 pages of dates, names, places. What he had done, what he had witnessed. He signed, and Celia added her signature. Then she wrote a second document, a deed transfer, and will. If Henry died fighting Pike, his homestead would pass to Julia Miller. Insurance, Celia said. Land means rights even for a woman, especially under the Homestead Act. Henry signed. That night, Julia couldn't sleep despite exhaustion. From his position by the window, Maddow spoke quietly. You are wondering why we help you? Yes. When Winona was taken, I went to the sheriff. Told him white men had taken Lakota girls. He laughed, said Indian girls run off all the time. Told me to leave before he arrested me for vagrancy. Maddow's voice remained level, but the fault line was there. I went to every authority. They all had reasons why they could not help. So I stopped asking and started watching. For 4 years waiting. You are the chance I've been waiting for. And if I am not enough, then we fail trying. That is better than waiting to die slowly. Julia thought about this. In my village, there was a story about a man who made a promise to the devil. She told the story about promises to evil, about being dead inside while still breathing, about choosing to fight even when it meant losing everything. Pike made that promise, she concluded. Now we make him stop breathing. Maddow smiled faintly. Yes. Tomorrow I teach you to shoot properly. A woman who can fight is worth 2 who cannot. Good, Julia said. I am tired of being afraid. Part 3. Learning to survive. Dawn came reluctantly. The wolves had departed their tracks, leading west toward easier prey. Celia fed them cornmeal mush and salt pork pressed supplies into saddlebags, saw them off with grim words. If you're alive in 3 days, send word. Otherwise, I'll assume the worst. Before leaving, Maddow kept his promise. Behind the schoolhouse, he withdrew a carbine from his saddlebag and handed it to Julia. This is yours now, he said. Not a gift, a tool. You will learn to use it or die because you could not. The carbine was heavier than expected, cold metal burning her hands. Maddow showed her everything, how to hold it, tucking stock tight against shoulder cheek to wood, breathing out when squeezing the trigger, not jerking. He set up targets bark against trees, charcoal X's marked. 50 feet, close enough to be sure you can work the mechanism. Julia's first shot went wide recoil, slamming her shoulder brutally. Her second missed by less. Her third actually struck the tree. Better, you pull right. Anticipating recoil, let the gun surprise you. They practiced for an hour. By the end, Julia could hit the target 2 times in 5. In a fight, Maddow said, guiding her hands through reloading, you will not aim carefully. You point, you shoot. You work the lever, you shoot again. The goal is not accuracy. The goal is to make the enemy flinch, to buy seconds. Do you understand? Julia nodded. I understand. They rode out mid-morning. The landscape grew rougher. More hills, deeper coulees, exposed rock like broken teeth. Darker clouds formed on the western horizon. More weather coming, Henry said. We should reach Echo Canyon by nightfall if we push. And if we do not, then we camp in the open and hope. They pushed hard, the horses' tired flanks dark with sweat despite the cold. Around early afternoon, the wagon wheels struck hidden stone. Something in the undercarriage cracked audibly. Henry examined it, face grim. Front axles cracked. Could last an hour, could last 10 minutes. No way to know. Can we fix it? Not here. Need a forge. Maddow scanned the horizon. Then we move carefully. If it breaks, we abandon the wagon and ride double. They continued every jolt, making Julia wince. An hour later, Maddow raised his hand for silence. Hoofbeats. Multiple horses moving fast from the north. 4 riders appeared angling toward them. Pike's men. Run or fight? Henry asked. Fight. Wagon cannot outrun them. Better to choose ground. Maddow pulled Julia down behind the wagon. Use it for cover. If they charge, shoot. Aim for horses, not men. A man on foot is half as dangerous. Julia's hands shook as she chambered around. Her heart hammered. The 4 men pulled up 100 yards out. One shouted, That's far enough, Miller Pike wants the girl. Hand her over, the rest walk away. Henry called back, Can't do that. Your protection ain't worth shit, Miller. Maddow's voice was quiet but carrying. I am Maddow of the Oglala Lakota. I have killed white men before. You will be neither my first nor my last. Ride away and live. Stay and die here. The wolves will eat your bodies before anyone finds them. The men exchanged glances. The leader spurred forward. Maddow fired. The horse went down instantly, throwing its rider hard. The man did not rise. The others scattered, taking cover, returning fire. Bullets whined off rocks and wagon boards. Julia aimed at where she had seen movement and pulled the trigger. The gun kicked. She worked the lever, fired again mechanically. Maddow fired twice more precisely. One man screamed and went still. Another clutched his leg, crawling backward. The last standing man apparently decided discretion was preferable. He mounted and rode south hard. The silence after the gunfight was profound. Julia's ears rang. Smoke drifted. Maddow checked the fallen carefully, then returned. We go now, before more come. They abandoned caution, running the horses, despite the cracked axle. The axle groaned and cracked further, but somehow held. The landscape blurred past. Echo Canyon appeared an hour before full dark steep walls rising on either side, a leaning mine headframe, scattered shacks. One chimney puffed smoke. Maddow approached, cautiously knocked. A voice, State your business. I am Maddow. Henry Miller sent me. We need to speak about Montgomery Pike. Pause. Then the door opened. Jean Laurent was 56, gray-haired, with a limp and sharp eyes. He studied them, gestured inside. The shack was small but meticulously organized. Ledgers stacked along walls, maps marked in red pencil. A kerosene lantern burned low. Laurent examined Julia's letters in silence, his expression darkening. He pulled down a ledger, flipped through pages. Thomas Gray. Pike used that name 5 times in 3 years. Same pattern each time. He looked at Julia with something like respect. You're lucky you ran. Can we prove it? Maddow asked. I've been trying for 7 years. Every time I get close, someone loses evidence or witnesses disappear. But this, he tapped the letters. This is sloppy. Maybe he's gotten careless. He pulled down a fresh notebook and began copying entries with meticulous care. Names, dates, towns, contract amounts. An hour later, the notebook was half full. "This is everything I have," he said, handing it to Julia. "Take it to Marshal Garrett in Wolf's Crossing. Don't stop, don't trust anyone with a badge unless they're outside Pike's reach." Maddo tucked the notebook inside his coat. "We leave at first light." Laurent nodded. "I'll ride with you. Been sitting in this canyon long enough." That night, Julia couldn't sleep. She sat near the window, staring out. After a while, Maddo joined her. "You afraid?" he asked. "Yes, always afraid. Since I left home." "When does afraid stop?" "Maybe never completely. But afraid does not mean weak. You ran from Pike. You crossed ice. You shot at men today. That takes strength." "You afraid?" "Yes. Afraid I will fail again. Afraid you will die because I was not fast enough." "You not fail yet." They sat in silence. Then Julia reached out briefly, touching Maddo's hand. "Thank you." He nodded. Words were not necessary. Part 4. Betrayal at Dawn. The hours before dawn were coldest, darkest, the time when death came easiest. Julia rested with eyes closed, but did not sleep. When she heard the soft scrape outside, her eyes opened. Across the room, Maddo was already moving toward the window. Then came the sound that changed everything, a single gunshot, flat and final. Maddo kicked the door open. Julia grabbed her carbine and followed, heart pounding. Jean Laurent lay face down in the frost 20 feet from the shack. Entry wound high in his back. He never saw it coming. Julia's gaze snapped to movement. Henry Miller stood at the clearing's edge, holding his horse's reins. In his right hand, a revolver, smoke rising from the barrel. Fresh tracks in frost led from shack to body, to where Henry stood. Only Henry's tracks. Maddo's rifle came up, aimed at Henry's chest. "What did you do?" Henry's face was shock, horror, and something like relief. The revolver slipped from his fingers. His voice broke. "Pike sent word 3 days ago, before you came. One of his men woke me in the dark. Pike said if I wanted to keep my land, keep my life, I had to follow if anyone helped a runaway. Take whatever evidence they found. Make sure it never reached a marshal. He said if I came back empty-handed, he'd hang me as a horse thief and take the land. He owns Judge Carver. I've seen him do it." Julia's hands shook with rage. "You worked for Pike the whole time?" "No, he threatened me. I didn't know what I'd do. I followed because I was afraid. I thought maybe I could steal the notebook while everyone slept, tell Pike I'd done it, and this would be over." He looked at Laurent's body. "But when he came out and saw me with the gun, I'd pulled it to feel braver. He knew. He was going to shout, wake everyone. And I panicked. Pike said take the evidence. But when Laurent saw me, I thought I'd lose everything. So He gestured helplessly. I pulled the trigger, meant to wound him, stop him yelling. But he didn't get up." Julia stepped forward, carbine pointed at Henry. "You killed him. Murdered a good man to save yourself." "I know." Henry's voice was barely a whisper. "I know what I am. I worked for Pike 6 years ago and called it just business. Now I killed for him and call it saving my land. But it's all the same. I'm a coward, always have been. And now a good man is dead because of it." Before anyone could respond, hoofbeats echoed through the canyon. Many horses, the sound amplified by stone walls. Maddo's head snapped toward the entrance. Through gathering light, torches appeared bobbing like malevolent stars. Riders. Dozens. "How many did you tell?" Maddo demanded. "Nobody, I swear. Pike must have followed me. He didn't trust me to do the job alone." The riders materialized, perhaps 22 men. At the head rode Montgomery Pike on a big bay gelding, his face set in cold determination. "How many?" Julia's voice was small. Maddo counted quickly. 22, maybe 23. Henry looked at Maddo, then at the approaching force. "I can run. Ride to Pike, tell him I got the notebook. He'll kill you the moment you're close enough. Maddow cut him off. You failed. You left witnesses. Pike doesn't forgive failure. Henry closed his eyes. Then what? Maddow studied the terrain with a scout's eye. This ground favors defense. Narrow approach, high walls. We can hold them if we're smart and willing to fight. He looked at Henry. Stand with us and fight, or run and die alone. Choose. Henry stared at Laurent's body, then at Julia's face, betrayed exhausted, furious. Something shifted in his expression. I've been running my whole life, he said quietly. From responsibility, from guilt, from who I should have been. Pike will kill me either way. Might as well die aiming at the man who made me into this. He picked up his revolver. Tell me what to do. Part 5. The Siege of Echo Canyon. They had 10 minutes. Maddow moved with controlled urgency, his tactical mind sorting through options. Laurent's body inside now. They dragged the dead man into the shack, covered him with a blanket. Maddow surveyed the terrain. Echo Canyon's entrance was 60 feet wide, flanked by steep stone walls 30 feet high. The mine entrance and buildings sat in a natural bowl 100 yards from the canyon mouth, defensible if they controlled the approach. The storage shed, Maddow said. Are there powder kegs? Henry's eyes widened. Yes. 3. Blasting powder from when the mine worked, 6-7 years old. Could be unstable. Good. Unstable powder is useful. They ran to the shed. Inside, covered in dust and cobwebs, sat 3 small kegs, marked with faded letters. The powder had crystallized around the edges, age and instability that would have made a miner refuse it. For their purposes, perfect. They hauled the kegs to a narrow ledge above the canyon entrance, wedging them into cracks in rock. Maddow constructed a fuse from torn shirt strips, soaking each in lamp oil, running the fuse back along rocks to a position behind a boulder where it could be lit without exposure. When I light this, he said, working quickly, you have 30 seconds, maybe less. When you hear me shout, get behind solid cover, your ears open your mouth. Open mouth? Julia asked. So blast pressure doesn't rupture your eardrums. The fuse ran from kegs down to the boulder. Maddow tested it twice, nodded. Julia, you stay in the shack. Guard the notebook, it's all that matters. If we die but you escape with it, we win. Henry, take position behind that ore cart, left approach. I take right from the rocks above. Don't waste ammunition on long shots. Wait until you cannot miss. Aim for horses, not men. Mounted men are twice as dangerous. Henry checked his revolver hand, steadier now. And if they get past the explosion, then we kill as many as we can and hope it's enough. Maddow looked at both. This is not a battle we win by killing all of them. We only need to make victory cost more than Pike will pay. Make them afraid. Make them hesitate. The riders appeared, torches guttering in growing light. Pike rode at the front face set. Behind him, hired gunsdrifters, ranch hands, townsmen, men who followed orders without asking questions. They spread out, entering the canyon, moving with practiced efficiency. Pike was no fool. He knew narrow approaches were death traps. Maddow and Henry held fire, letting riders come deeper, letting them commit. When the lead riders were 30 yards from mine buildings, when a dozen had passed beneath the ledge, Maddow struck the match. The fuse caught with a hiss. Orange flame ate rapidly toward the kegs. Maddow dropped behind the boulder. Down! Julia threw herself against the shack's back wall, hands over ears, mouth open. Henry dove behind the ore cart. The explosion was enormous. Not simply loud, a physical force that slammed into canyon walls and bounced back, a pressure wave that compressed chests and blurred vision. The ledge disintegrated. Rock dirt debris avalanched down in a roaring cascade, crushing everything in its path, burying men and horses. Sound echoed until the earth itself seemed to scream. Dust and smoke billowed, turning day to twilight. When echoes died and dust settled, Julia looked. The canyon entrance was choked with rubble, a mound 20 feet high, completely blocking passage. Bodies and parts of bodies were visible. Horses screamed. Men at the column's back scrambled backward, their advance broken. But Pike was alive. He'd been far enough back to avoid the worst. Now he shouted orders, rallying men, pointing toward a narrow side gully, offering alternate approach. 9 men followed him, dismounting, advancing on foot with rifles and revolvers. Pike's core men, the loyal ones who knew their safety, lay in his continued power. The fight became close and vicious. Matto met them among ruined shacks and mine buildings, his rifle cracking methodically. One man fell, then another. The others found cover, returning fire. Bullets struck stone and wood, filling air with splinters and rock chips. Julia fired from the window, working the lever mechanically, pointing and shooting, trying to make the enemy flinch. One of Pike's men, heavy-set, scarred, fired from behind an overturned sled. His bullet struck rock beside Matto's head, showering him with fragments that drew blood. Matto shifted, brought his rifle up, fired. The bullet took the gunman in the throat. He went down choking, drowning in blood. Another man charged Henry's position. Bullets rang like bells against the ore cart. Henry leaned around the edge, fired twice. First shot missed, second took the man in the hip, dropping him. But more kept coming. Matto scrambled along an outcropping, trying for better position. His boots slipped on frost-slicked stone. He fell hard, his wounded leg giving out, tumbling 6 feet before catching himself. Pain exploded through his calf. One of Pike's men saw him fall, rushed forward, raising his rifle. Julia shot him. Her bullet took him in the side, not killing but staggering him. She worked the lever, shot again. This time he went down. Matto dragged himself up, legs screaming, blood soaking his boot. He nodded once to Julia, acknowledgement, respect, and limped toward cover. The fight devolved into chaos. Smoke and dust, men shouting, guns cracking, wounded screaming. Then the secondary collapse occurred. A section of canyon wall 30 feet wide, loosened by the explosion's vibration, simply slid down. Tons of rock and dirt. Matto, climbing back toward camp, was directly in its path. He had 2 seconds of warning. Tried to run. His injured leg betrayed him. The slide's edge caught him, knocked him down, and rock poured over him, burying him, crushing him into darkness. Julia saw it happen. Saw Matto disappear beneath cascading stone. His shout cut off abruptly. No. She ran from the shack, abandoning cover. Bullets kicked up dirt around her feet. One passed close enough she felt its wind. She didn't care. She reached the slide's edge and began clawing at stones, pulling rocks away, digging frantically. Henry saw, ran to help, despite bullets striking around him. Together, they dug heaving stones aside, hands bleeding. They found Matto's hand, first protruding from rubble, still moving. They dug faster, uncovering his arm, shoulder, head. His face was gray with dust and pain, blood from nose and ears, but his eyes were open. "Can you move?" Julia gasped. Matto tried, nearly screamed. Left leg pinned under a boulder too large to shift. "Leg trapped. Leave me. Take notebook and run." "No." Julia's voice was absolute. She grabbed the boulder, planted, feet heaved. It didn't move. She tried again, Henry joining her, both straining until muscles tore and vision grayed. The boulder shifted an inch. Then another. Then suddenly gave way, rolling aside, and Matto's leg was free. Badly broken shin bent unnaturally, but free. They dragged Matto behind cover as another volley rang out. Back at the shack, the 3 of them wounded and exhausted, ammunition running low. Pike was still coming. He'd lost 15 men, but still had 5 loyal guns advancing steadily. The end was coming. Pike reached the barn where horses had been sheltered. He kicked the door open, revolver raised. Julia was there, carbine leveled. Henry beside her, propping up Maddo, all three making their final stand. Pike looked at them and smiled. Not pleasant. "This has been expensive, Julia. You've cost me dearly. I'm going to make you pay. Every day for the rest of your very short life." "You will have to kill me first," Julia said. "I don't think so. You're valuable. Damaged, but valuable." Pike raised his revolver at Maddo. "I'll start with the Indian." The yoke, Maddo tried to move to bring his rifle up, but his broken leg gave out. His weapon clattered away. Pike's finger tightened on the trigger. A rifle shot cracked, and Pike jerked sideways, blood blooming on his shoulder. He stumbled, turning, trying to find the source. Another shot took him in the chest, high and left. Pike's eyes went wide with shock. He staggered backward, trying to raise his weapon. Henry Miller stood braced against the doorframe, Laurent's rifle smoking. He'd crawled there, dragged himself across 20 feet of open ground, while Pike focused on Julia and Maddo. His shirt was soaked with blood from a wound Julia hadn't seen, but his hands were steady. "That's for Laurent," Henry said quietly. "And for every woman you destroyed." He fired again. The bullet struck Pike square in the heart. Montgomery Pike fell backward into straw and died. His remaining men, seeing their employer dead, made rapid calculations. Not paid enough to die for a corpse. One by one, they lowered weapons, mounted horses, rode away. Silence fell over Echo Canyon. Only ragged breathing and a distant hawk's cry. Henry slid down the doorframe to sit in dirt, rifle falling from his hands. He looked at his chest, at the spreading stain, laughed weakly. "Well, at least I went out doing something right." Julia scrambled to him, pressing hands against the wound. But she felt blood pumping between her fingers, warm and unstoppable. Henry looked up at her. "Notebook. You still have it?" "Yes." "Good. Take it to Garrett. Make sure everyone knows what Pike did. Free the women." He coughed, blood flecking his lips. "And Julia, the land. It's yours now. Legal. Celia has the papers. Build something good there." "You did good," Julia said, tears streaming. "At the end, you did good." Henry smiled faintly. Maybe that counts for something. His breathing grew shallow. He looked at Maddo. "Take care of her." Maddo nodded. "I will." Henry's eyes closed. His chest rose once more. Stuttered, went still. Julia sat back, hands covered in blood, and wept. Epilogue. The words that echo. They heard horses while the sun climbed, disciplined hoofbeats formation riding. Territorial Marshal Benjamin Garrett from Wolf's Crossing with 6 deputies, and Celia Harper among them. Garrett examined the scene Laurent covered, Henry dead Pike's body, Maddo's broken leg, Julia's blood-stained hands. "Tell me everything." They told the story. Julia produced Laurent's notebook pages, crumpled but intact. Garrett studied it for long minutes, his face growing grim. "This is comprehensive. 7 years of documentation. If half is accurate, Pike ran one of the largest vice operations in the territory." One deputy approached. "Marshal, we found another ledger in Pike's saddlebags. Current operations, names, locations, amounts." Garrett examined it. He kept detailed records of everything. He looked at Julia with respect. "Miss, you've handed us enough to dismantle Pike's entire organization." Celia produced the documents, Henry's confession, the deed transfer. Henry knew what he was risking. He knew it would cost his life. Garrett read them. "This transfers ownership of Miller's homestead to you, Miss Julia. Legal under the Homestead Act. 160 acres. You own land, which means you have rights. They buried Henry and Laurent on a rise overlooking Echo Canyon under cairns that would keep wolves away. Celia spoke words about the necessity of standing against evil, even at terrible cost. The trials came 3 months later in Helena. Julia testified for 3 days, describing Pike's operation in clinical detail. Maddow testified about his sister. Celia about documents. 11 freed women testified about false debts about being trapped. The judge listened to every word. When verdicts came, his voice was cold and final. Sheriff Dan Hollis, 20 years in territorial prison. Judge Thomas Carver, removal and 10 years. 4 business owners, 5 to 15 years each. Pike's surviving gunmen, 15 years. The boarding house was sold, proceeds going to help freed women. Pike's estate was seized and liquidated, half to the Territorial Fund, half divided among identified victims. And in Marshal Garrett's report was a small notation. Records included reference to a Winona of the Oglala Lakota, age 16, at time of initial contact, last noted as transferred to Butte City establishment. Further investigation warranted. Garrett rode to the Miller Ranch himself to deliver that information. She's alive, working in a laundry, having bought her freedom. The associate is in custody. Your sister is free. I have her address. Maddow's hands stilled. Does she want to come home? I don't know. She's been through things. She's alive. She's free. He left an envelope and departed. That evening, Maddow sat with Julia and Celia, staring at the envelope. I do not know what to say to her. What words heal 4 years? Julia covered his hand with hers. Maybe you start with, I never stopped looking. Maybe that's enough for now. Maddow wrote, Winona, my sister. I searched for 2 years and never stopped loving you. You have a home here if you want it. If not, I understand. But know you are free. You are safe. You are loved. Your brother Maddow. 6 weeks later, a response. Brother, I am not ready to come home yet. Maybe never. But I am glad you are alive. And glad I am not forgotten. That is enough for now. Years passed. The Miller Ranch became known as one of the finest operations in Montana. Julia Miller, she kept the name, became known as a woman who paid debts, kept her word, could not be intimidated. Maddow became known as the best horse trainer between Silver Dollar and Helene. Celia's school expanded to a permanent building eventually, with a second teacher. The freed women scattered. Some went east, others stayed, built lives. 3 years after Pike's death, Julia received a letter from a woman named Helena. I was in the wagon with you. I did not run. But when they freed us, I remembered you ran. That gave me courage. I am married now to a good man. We have a daughter. Her name is Julia. You saved more than yourself. Thank you. In the 5th year, Winona visited. She stayed 3 days, spoke little of what happened. On the 3rd day, as she prepared to leave, she said, You did not fail me, brother. The only one who failed was the man who chose to do evil. I may never come home, but I am glad you are alive. I am glad you found peace. In the 10th year, Julia was 33, Maddow 41. One evening on the porch, Julia said suddenly, Do you remember the first thing you said to me in the barn? I remember. You said, You're safe here. Do you remember? I remember. Julia looked across the land they'd built. You told the truth. I have been safe here, not just that night, but every night since. Now I want to make others safe. I want to offer sanctuary to women like me. What do you think? Maddow smiled, rare, genuine. I think that is the best use of this land. Henry would approve. Laurent would approve. It is right. Then we will do it. Make this place what it was always meant to be, not just a ranch, but a refuge. They began slowly. The first woman arrived in spring, a widow fleeing abuse. She stayed 3 months, learned skills, left with money for a new life. Others followed. Not many, but enough. Enough that women across the territory whispered about the Miller Ranch, about the white woman and Lakota man who asked no questions and offered safety. Julia and Maddo never married, never became lovers. Their relationship existed in a space society had no words for: partners, companions, two people who built something from shared trauma and mutual respect. When Julia was 45 and Maddo 53, a historian came to interview them. At the end, he asked, "What was the turning point when things truly changed?" Julia thought, "It was when someone told me I was safe and then proved it." Everything after the fight, trials, laws, ranch women we've helped, all started with 3 words. You're safe here. When someone says that, and means it when they back those words with their life, that's when the world begins to change. One person at a time, one choice at a time. Years later, when people told stories about the winter Pike fell, they spoke of many things. The explosion, the trials, the lives rebuilt. But always they returned to the image that started it all. A Lakota warrior standing in a barn doorway during the worst blizzard in memory, holding a lantern high, looking up at a terrified girl in the hayloft, speaking 3 words that would change both their lives and countless others. 3 words that became a promise, a foundation, a beginning. You're safe here. And for the first time in Julia's life, someone had meant it.